Get some!
Church, Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. As you all know, there is a lot of news. So there's news domestically. Down goes Joe Manchin. We'll talk about it in a little bit. And then obviously news of war and our usual lighter stuff where we will dissect some of the cultural issues happening in America, and there are a lot of that too.
I'm looking forward to our members only bonus episode today because we're going to get into a discussion about group chats. There is some evidence, a growing body of evidence, if you will, about how it ruins people's lives.
Yeah,
so we're gonna share that body of evidence with you.
Bodies are gonna be shared.
So you can watch that if you're a member, and if you're not a member, you can become one by going to tyt.com/join, or just click on that join button if you're watching us live on YouTube. All right, you ready?
Yeah, it's just one last quick thing. So a lot of folks donate through Super Chat, which we love and appreciate. And really, thank you to all of you. You can also donate through tyt.com/join, and all of that goes to us. And so any way you do it, we love you for it. But let's do the news.
All right, well, there was, of course, debate coverage last night, but we did want to just briefly talk about something that stood out to us in the majority of the debate last night. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I would be telling Bibi, finish the job once and for all with these butchers, Hamas.
The first thing I said to him when it happened was I said, finish them, finish them.
So what I would tell Bibi is that Israel has the right and the responsibility to defend itself. I would tell him to smoke those terrorists on his southern border, and then I'll tell him as president of the United States, I'll be smoking the terrorists on our southern border.
It was clear during the third GOP primary debate that every single candidate was competing for who's the biggest war hawk on that stage, who's the biggest supporter and defender of Israel, regardless of what the Israeli government, along with the IDF, does in the Gaza Strip. But Vivek Ramaswamy did have a little bit of a different answer, and I do want to get into that a little later in this segment. But before we do, here's more of what I was referring to.
As President of the United States, what would you be urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do at this moment? Governor DeSantis.
I would be telling Bibi, finish the job once and for all with these butchers, Hamas. They're terrorists. They're massacring innocent people. They would wipe every Jew off the globe if they could. He cannot live with that threat right by his country. The Hamas should release every hostage and they should unconditionally surrender. I'm sick of hearing the media. I'm sick of hearing other people blame Israel just for defending itself.
The first thing I said to him when it happened was I said, finish them. Finish them. And the reason is I worked on this every day when I was at the United Nations. And we have to remember that they have to, one, eliminate Hamas, two, support Israel with whatever they need, whenever they need it, and three, make sure we bring our hostages home. The last thing we need to do is to tell Israel what to do. The only thing we should be doing is supporting them and eliminating Hamas. It is not that Israel needs America. America needs Israel. They are the tip of the spear when it comes to this Islamic terrorism, and we need to make sure that we have their backs in that process.
I have a lot to say. Now, look, my view, and I believe Cenk's view as well, is going after Hamas is totally fine. But understand that they're making these statements with the backdrop of what's currently transpiring in the Gaza Strip, where the majority of people dying are not Hamas militants. Overwhelmingly, the vast majority of people getting killed are innocent Palestinian civilians, women, children, elderly people. You have refugee camps being bombed relentlessly. You have hospitals being bombed, and you keep hearing the same talking point over and over again. With, by the way, we just take what Israel says at face value without demanding evidence of what they're saying. But they keep saying, well, Hamas is using innocent Palestinians as human shields. What could we do? Of course, we're gonna bomb the refugee camps anyway. Of course, we're gonna bomb the hospitals anyway. Of course, we're gonna bomb the schools anyway. And I just personally disagree with that tactic. I think when you look at the civilian death toll, it's really hard to justify what the Israeli government is doing. And what I personally have a problem with is Nikki Haley saying, well, it's not up to us to tell Israel what to do. We should support them no matter what they want to do. I do not agree with that. I also don't agree with the notion that we need Israel more than they need us. And this is where you should jump in, Cenk. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, a lot to say about that. First of all, the human shield argument is so bothersome because, so what is the right answer? They're hiding behind human shields. So we killed the human shields?
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
That apparently they're all saying that that's the right answer, which is absurd and inhumane. So the main thing I want to say about these Republicans is I'm glad that they're outing themselves, because 2/3 of the country wants a ceasefire. They don't want this endless bloodshed. They don't want Israelis killed. They don't want Palestinians killed. But these Republicans are saying, no, we're not in that 2/3. We're in the 1/3. And within that third, we're in even more specific and radical extreme, where we say green light on all civilian deaths. There should be no brakes in the car. We should never question Israel, never, no matter what they do. Can you imagine if we said that about any other ally? Even if we said it about Canada or the UK, why? Why would we never question them? What if we vehemently disagree with something they did? How about the second largest army in NATO, Turkey? What, we're never allowed to disagree with Turkey just because they're an ally? What an insane standard.
We would never say that about our own government. I just want you to have that point really sink in.
And that's such a great point, Anna, because think about it. They're all out there criticizing the current US government led by Joe Biden, right? So they're like, God damn it, the American government sucks, right? We gotta make America great again, because America right now is terrible. America's awful. Israel, never question Israel. Israel cannot be criticized. This is lunacy. This is America first. This is insanity. And Israel doesn't need America. America needs Israel. When's the last time Israel helped you with your gas prices or your wages or your health care? What do we need Israel for? Look, Israel's an ally, I guess. And so I'm not like, I want a two-state solution. I want Israel to be a beautiful, great, prosperous, peaceful nation, right? But we desperately need it for what? They just say it. They never explain it because it's nonsense. We don't need them, we don't need Canada, we don't need UK more than they need us. Okay, great. By the way, if Nikki Haley's right and Israel doesn't need us, great, then why are we sending them billions of dollars?
Well,
problem solved, problem solved. No, Nikki Haley just said they don't need us at all. So why the hell would I send $1 to a country that doesn't need us? Thank you for the admission. Let alone the fact that they're using it now to butcher 10,000 civilians, 4,000 to 5,000 kids. Kids, the more we see them on TV, the more this barbarism of these Republican candidates will not stand. And one more thing for now. They keep saying, finish them, finish them. Other than it being barbaric, like what do you think you're Maximus, right? These are not soldiers you're fighting against. The overwhelming majority of the 10,000 people killed are civilians, and a huge percentage are children. So finish what? All the kids in Palestine and in Gaza? Who do you want to murder as you pretend to be a tough guy cowboy, right? But then the second part of that is, finish them how? When do we know when they're finished? Is Hamas gonna come out and go, oh guys, by the way, we're finished? No, it's an impossible standard. It's meant to be impossible, so you do endless bombings and endless killings.
Well, look, I think they're actually creating more terrorists, okay, more extremists. Because again, if you are not careful in how you conduct this war, and you're just, brazenly killing innocent civilians and wiping out nearly every member of every family, well, then the remaining family members, we know how this works. This isn't our first rodeo as Americans who are living in a country governed by a federal government that carried out war crimes itself and led to the reproduction of more extremism. Where do you think ISIS came out of? ISIS was the byproduct of our war against Al-Qaeda. That doesn't mean that going after Al-Qaeda wasn't a worthy cause. It's the way we went after Al-Qaeda. It's the way that we slaughtered innocent civilians that helped to radicalize individuals in that part of the world and helped Al-Qaeda and ISIS later recruit people into their cause. I hate that that's a reality, but that was the reality of what happened. And that is currently what is being reproduced as we speak. So it's so counterproductive because not only is it brutal and vicious and deadly for Palestinian civilians, it's also awful in the future for Israeli civilians who should be able to live in peace, who shouldn't be worried about their safety.
Yeah, I want to add one quick thing about ISIS. It's actually not it's worse. It's not a byproduct of our war against Al-Qaeda. It's a byproduct of our needless war against Iraq, which we should have never done in the first place.
That's true, yes.
And why did ISIS come out of Iraq? That's because we invaded the wrong country and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. So look, you can say, when it comes to the word terrorist, I just shut off my mind and I never think about it. I just label them giant billions of people in that category and I never analyze it. But if Iraq had actually invaded us and killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, what do you think Americans would do? What do you think guys in Texas would do? What do you think the guys in the militia would do?
They'd be radicalized. I would probably be radicalized.
You think they might be a little radicalized? You think they might want to fight back against the government that killed hundreds of thousands of their brothers and sisters and their children and their grandmothers? Okay, so that's why that militant groups come out of that oppression. Now it doesn't justify the terrorism, but if you turn off your mind and say, I don't want to know why, I don't care about causes, I just prefer to be dumb and ignorant. Well, okay, that's a choice that Republicans make, the politicians make. They all just said it on the stage. I just turn off my mind. I turn off my mind. I don't want to hear anything. All the Muslims are terrorists. All the Palestinians are terrorists. Finish them. Finish them. Finish them. And then Ramaswamy, what a slime ball.
Well,
I'm going to smoke the terrorists on our southern.
Well,
what are you going to do? You're going to invade Mexico?
Hold on.
You're smoking something else, brother.
Okay, hold on. So Ramaswamy though had a little bit of a different reaction to what's currently transpiring in Israel and in Gaza. So he was a little sneaky with his answer.
As always.
So with that said, why don't we watch and then I'll explain exactly what I mean. Well, let's take a look.
Mr. Ramaswamy, any daylight between you and the candidates we just heard on this issue on what you would tell the prime minister?
Not in terms of what I would tell the prime minister, no. In fact, I would go one step further. The founding vision of Israel was based on the idea that they don't want to depend on anybody else's sympathy or direction in defending themselves. So what I would tell Bibi is that Israel has the right and the responsibility to defend itself. I would tell him to smoke those terrorists on his southern border, and then I'll tell him as president of the United States, I'll be smoking the terrorists on our southern border. That's his responsibility. This is our responsibility. That's how we move forward. But I want to be careful to avoid making the mistakes from the neocon establishment of the past. Corrupt politicians in both parties spent trillions, killed millions, made billions for themselves in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, fighting wars that sent thousands of our sons and daughters, people my age, to die in wars that did not advance anyone's interests, adding $7 trillion to our national debt.
Okay, so let me unpack that for you. This is my read of what his answer was, okay? Listen, Israel should do whatever Israel wants to do. We shouldn't be funding it. We should be focusing on America first, right? That is how he is making or differentiating himself from the other candidates on that debate stage on the issue. Now, of course, he's not gonna come out and say we shouldn't be funding Israel's war in Gaza, but that is essentially what he's saying when he starts off that answer by really homing in on the fact that Israel wants to be independent, Israel doesn't want to be told what to do. I thought that was an interesting answer. Basically, it's this isolationist way of dealing with it where it's like, let them do whatever they want, but we should be focusing on us.
Yeah, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. But first, when we're discussing this, why can't any of the Republicans say we're not going to fund Israel's war against innocent Palestinians? That's such a curious thing. Like, they disagree on a million different things, but this is the one thing that no Republican politician is allowed to disagree on, even outsider Vivek Ramaswamy. Why? There's no one ever gives the reason. Okay, I'll tell you what the reason is. It's donors. So you can cry about that if you like, and I don't want any anti-Semitic BS. Jewish donors are a tiny percentage of the overall donors in this country. And the number one problem with donors is corporate donors, not individuals, okay? And there's evangelical donors in this particular issue, and there's also defense contractor donors on this particular issue. So now back to Ramaswamy, he wants to have his cake and eat it too. He criticized Nikki Haley for defense contractors in previous debates. He wants to be an isolationist, America first. Hey, I get credit, I don't want to do any of that. But he still it wants to protect his donor base or whatever, for whatever reason. He comes out and says, no, but Israel gets to do whatever the hell they want. So Israel should kill everyone, but America first. So he's just trying to cover every base there is. Okay, these voters, I'll give you that. Those voters and those donors, I'll give you whatever you want to hear, because I'm a Ramaswamy. And I'll just, this is what I do. You can't ever pin me down in any position because I'm trying to give everybody everything while pretending that I'm principled.
It's also interesting to see how things have changed in regard to this quest for freedom of speech and freedom of expression, because now all of a sudden the tables are turned, right? The right wing is looking for censorship and the left wing is complaining about the censorship of any pro-Palestinian messaging or any pro-Palestinian protest. And I want to just quickly say, because I think you and I have been consistent on this issue. We have defended right-wing speakers on college campuses, even though we disagree with those right-wing speakers. And the reason why we did that, guys, is because freedom of expression and freedom of speech is important. Okay, it can't just be important to you when it comes to the issues you care about and your ability to speak freely on those issues. It's important to protect freedom of speech and expression regardless of who the messenger is and what they're messaging. Now, of course, there are certain limitations to freedom of speech. You can't incite violence, for instance, but hate speech is also protected under the First Amendment. And so, with that said, I want to just get into what's happening on college campuses right now, because there are two different groups of people, right? And I think that the two groups of people are in some cases unintentionally and in other cases intentionally being conflated. There are the people who are speaking out in favor of Hamas, and they are getting conflated with people who are not in favor of Hamas, but do not agree with the US providing unwavering support for Israel, knowing what Israel is carrying out in the Gaza Strip, knowing what the civilian death toll of Palestinians happens to be in the Gaza Strip. And so there's this effort to really silence all protesters right now on college campuses, and I think it's wrong. So when asked on the debate stage, this question was asked, okay? So when asked how they would respond to anti-Semitism on college campuses, the candidates vowed to crack down on student protesters, suggesting that pro-Palestinian activists were expressing support for Hamas. Only one, Vivek Ramaswamy, and I give him credit for this, said students should not face retribution, defending their right to free speech. Nikki Haley even suggested that college administrators were more tolerant of anti-Semitism as opposed to racism. If the KKK were doing this, every college president would be up in arms. This is no different. You should treat it exactly the same. Anti-Semitism is just as awful as racism. Again, conflating pro-Palestinian protests, pro-Palestinian student groups to individuals who support Hamas. Again, there have been a few examples of students saying things that I vehemently disagree with. I do not think you should be supportive of Hamas, but to put this, description and use it against all pro-Palestinian protesters on college campuses, I think is wrong. And not only misleading it, I think it's a lie. Governor Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott had some more extreme punishments in mind when it came to these schools and these students. Let's take a look.
So, let me just say to every single university president in America, federal funding is a privilege, not a right. To every student who've come to our country on a visa to a college campus, your visa is a privilege, not a right. To all the students on visas who are encouraging Jewish genocide, I would deport you from those campuses. We have to stand strong with our Jewish Americans.
I was the first presidential candidate to say, if you are here on a student visa as a foreign national, you're making common cause with Hamas, I'm canceling your visa and I'm sending you home. No questions asked. I already acted in Florida. We had a group, Students for Justice of Palestine. They said they are common cause with Hamas. They said, we're not just in solidarity, this is what we are. We deactivated them. We're not going to use state tax dollars to fund jihad. No way.
So I'm just addressing what Tim Scott said. I mean, I disagreed with a lot of what was said right there on that debate stage, but Tim Scott just advocated for the government to punish universities, public universities, right? Because public universities are the ones that get federal dollars. He wants the government to punish those universities by taking away that federal funding if they allow pro-Palestinian protests on their campuses. I don't know, I'm not a constitutional expert, but isn't that unconstitutional? Doesn't that go against the First Amendment? That's the government punishing speech.
So first of all, of course that's true. And second of all, look at the irony of the Republicans. We're for freedom, man. Okay, we want freedom of speech for people supporting the Confederacy, people being racist, people being sexist, people being Nazis. Freedom of speech. Oh, you're pro-Palestinian and you don't want them killed? Good, ban them, should throw them out of the country, take away all their funding. Come on, guys. No, seriously, if you're a right winger and you really have said these things about how much you believe in freedom of speech, I'm curious what your position is. Look, I'll even go give you the benefit of the doubt. I think that a lot of the actual voters that are right wingers are gonna go, nah, it's a fair point, man. That's not freedom of speech. So why are we doing this, right? But for the politicians, oh, forget about it. They don't care. It's just a punchline to them. They don't care about freedom of speech at all. The minute you disagree with them or their donors, boom, your freedom of speech is gone in a second. What did DeSantis say there? No questions asked. How do you even know if they're guilty if you didn't ask them any questions? How do you know if they were supporting Hamas or if they were just supporting Palestinian civilians? You don't know because you didn't ask them any questions. In other words, if you disagree with my political position, I will eliminate you. That is the very opposite of freedom of speech. Inarguable.
I want to also note that just today, 1,800 Jewish Americans put out a letter. They signed a letter, okay, basically arguing that showing support for Palestinians is not the same as supporting Hamas.
Of course,
which is obvious to anyone who's actually thinking deeply about this, not even thinking deeply, just actually stopping to think about what they're saying and what's actually going on in the country.
Can I just say, I'm sorry. It's so obvious that literally everyone outside of politicians and media figures that are demagoguing on this issue. No one thinks to say, hey, please don't kill Palestinian babies is the equivalent of supporting Hamas or being a terrorist. Unless you've lost your mind or you're a Republican, by the way, or Democratic politician or a media figure. The demagogues are the only ones saying absurd things like that.
Exactly, so Naomi Klein was one of the signatories for that letter. And I think it's important to say that because again, freedom of expression is important. Obviously, I do not support speech that incites violence or targets a certain group to be persecuted in some way or terrorized in some way. But a lot of these protesters are watching in horror as all of these innocent civilians are dying. And I think that we need to protect their speech. Even if you somehow disagree with what they're saying, okay, that's fine. But then engage in your own speech. Explain why you disagree with what they're saying. And there have been, pro-Israeli protests happening in the country as well. Good for you. I mean, that's awesome. That is what the country should be supportive of. That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah, two more things for me. One, now some Fox News anchors like Harris Faulkner is saying that all of these protesters are terrorists.
Come on.
Okay, so now wait a minute. How about the right wing? The right wing, unfortunately, has domestic terrorists in this country. The FBI has said that they're the #1 domestic terrorist group. First of all, does that make all the right wingers terrorists? Of course not. That's insanity, right? That's a tiny, microscopic percentage of right wingers that have actually done acts of terrorism in this country. Same thing with Muslims, by the way. A microscopic percentage of Muslims compared to the 1.6 billion Muslims that exist in the world, let alone protesters. So imagine if they said that about right-wing protesters. Hey, they are supporting causes that lead to the right-wing terrorism in this country. That's it. they're all terrorists. All of you right-wingers are terrorists, right? That's insane. You would never be in favor of that. And you shouldn't be in favor of that if you just substitute in Palestinians versus right-wingers, right? Second and last thing. So Nikki Haley says that she's very concerned and that these protesters, the great majority of which are just saying, please stop killing Palestinian civilians. They're the KKK. If you want to stop killing civilians, that's the KKK, okay? By the way, these anti-Semitic protesters, we condemn them. What's so hard about that? I don't have to arrest them, I don't have to kill them, I don't have to throw them out of the country, but yeah, don't be an anti-Semitic prick, don't be, and we'll fight you 100%. So that's easy, speech against speech, right? But she says, no, they're the KKK, all the protesters, if they dare to support Palestinians. I don't remember these same politicians going ballistic when Nick Fuentes and Kanye West had dinner with Donald Trump.
Weird.
And they both said that they were in favor of Hitler. Do you remember talking to the KKK and how Donald Trump should be disqualified and should never be seen, run for office again because he's having dinner with Nazis? He'd remember earlier he said that there were good people on the Nazi side. Remember the other day he used the Nazi quote about how immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. Only Hitler and Trump have used that quote. Did I see everyone on that stage go, KKK, Nazis, we should ban Donald Trump's speech? No, when he's actually praising Nazis and having dinner with them, no problem at all. So this isn't about anti-Semitism at all. It's as always, these corrupt politicians with their own agenda to start more wars. That's what this is about.
All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we have, I think, a really great story involving congressional staffers on both sides of the political aisle, taking some action, making a stand on their views about what's happening in Gaza. We'll do that. And then later we'll also talk a little bit about Joe Manchin's decision to not run for re-election. What's behind that decision? We'll talk about that and more coming right up.
TYT, Cenk, Anna, Ted F, River 2C, and Samar Madani, who all joined by hitting the join button below. We do the show with all of you guys, all the members. You make this show possible, so thank you, brothers and sisters. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right, well, we've got one more story related to Israel's war on Gaza. Let's get to it.
Characterize the prioritization of the Israel Defense Forces, what their operations in Gaza are intended to dismantle the military infrastructure of Hamas that made it possible to perpetrate an attack like the world saw on October 7th.
And I want to be clear, I think they should be able to protect themselves against a similar attack. We have long supported them in their ability to do that. But they also directly struck an ambulance. They struck refugee shelters 2 or 3 times.
That was incredible, mostly because statements like that are rare in the United States Congress. That was Democratic Representative Joaquin Castro, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. Israel should defend itself and should go after Hamas, but the way in which they're doing it has led to an insanely high civilian death toll in Gaza. Innocent Palestinians are dying as a result, and I love that he brought that up in this context. Now, not everyone is willing to sit back and accept anything and everything that the Israeli government wants to carry out. As you just saw, Joaquin Castro is one of them. So let's get to a little more video, and then we'll talk about how congressional staffers are also taking a stand. Let's watch.
We take votes for support, as we try to assess the situation. I think just as the world is aghast at the barbarity of what happened October 7th, the world also looks at that and asks the question about why an ambulance, why 30-something members of the press have been killed, why 4,000 or 5,000 children have already been killed.
Now, there are growing calls for a ceasefire, and just today, President Joe Biden was asked, what are the chances of a ceasefire? And he said, no, none. So Israel has agreed to daily 4-hour humanitarian pauses so the people who are dealing with the aerial bombardment in northern Gaza can flee to southern Gaza, which is also dealing with an aerial bombardment. So, Cenk, before we get to the congressional staffers, your thoughts on what Castro said there? What is the likelihood that AIPAC and the Democratic Majority for Israel will heavily fund whoever his primary challenger might be?
Yeah, no, the dam is breaking, and this is a really important development, guys. So Castro is borderline progressive. I wouldn't call him a progressive, but he's progressive adjacent. But my point there is that he's not a diehard left winger. So he's a little bit more establishment wing of the party. So for him to come out and say, no, I am questioning Israel, and they're killing a lot of civilians and I'm not comfortable with it, that means that the tide is turning. Just a couple of days ago, Mark Pocan, who is a progressive and who's the head of, for a while, the head of the Progressive Caucus, came out swinging against AIPAC in a way that I have never seen in American politics. He's like, he cursed them out and he said, come for me. I know how much money you guys spend, but you know what? You guys are right wingers. You mainly support Republicans and you supported the Republican traitors who tried to overthrow our democracy. And basically, and Pocan's not a tough guy, right? But he was so mad that he was like, you're not coming for me, I'm coming for you. Now, there's this great strength that AIPAC had, and I remember talking about this with Ari Berman, who wrote a piece about it in The Nation like over a decade ago, and he made a great point. He's like, they actually don't have that much money compared to the giant industries like the drug companies, the banks, etc. But they concentrate their money on races in a way that is so flamboyant, right? That it gets everybody's attention. Hey, we're going to defeat Nina Turner in Cleveland, and we're going to find this hack, this nobody, and we're just going to hand her the election by spending $4 to $6 million to make sure she wins. She's a nobody. She only raised her hand to say, I'm willing to be the most corrupt, and that's why we're giving it to her, in essence, through the ads. And so when people see that, they panic. Even the legendary populist John Fetterman panicked, and he said, okay, whatever Israel wants, and he's still saying it to this day. So that is how they use people as an example. And it's a brilliant tactic. It's a tactic I'd like to use at Wolfpack to ironically target all the corrupt Congress people. Okay, now having said that, it's not working anymore because now the dam is broken and there's too many Democrats going, oh yeah, I'm against you, I'm against you, I'm against you. What are you gonna do now? You don't have the same money that the drug companies have and the oil companies have, etc.
Yeah.
You can't come for all of us. So this is a really important moment in American politics where they have begun to defy one of the most important lobbies in my lifetime.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I am curious to see how that all plays out. I think you're making a good point. The one thing I will say is that they have directed their ire toward Rashida Tlaib, and so there are ads playing in Michigan right now. They blasted out an email that basically has her face superimposed on images of what Hamas did on October 7th, essentially spreading a message that Rashida Tlaib is supportive of what Hamas did. So if they're gonna target anyone, it's clear to me that they're gonna focus their energy on Rashida Tlaib. And look, I don't do this ever on the show, but please show Rashida Tlaib your support because what she is doing in calling out the brutality in Gaza is important. The fact that she got censured for speaking out about that is pretty gross to say the least. And so if you can support her through donating to her campaign, even showing her support on social media, I think that would go a long way. Go ahead, Cenk.
So look, Rashida Tlaib has certainly been imperfect in this entire situation. Like I hate the term "from the river to the sea."
Agreed, yeah.
And so I wish she hadn't used that in the ad. And in early days, I didn't love the response, etc. That's not the point, guys. And if you want to be mad at her for that, no problem, okay? But trying to eliminate her and censure her and all these things for her standing up, largely 90% of what she did was stand up for Palestinians, which in my lifetime, before Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and to be fair, Keith Ellison, before them, no one ever stood up for Palestinians in the United States Congress. Then later, Bernie Sanders was also heroic in that regard. So, but when they go to target her and say, okay, if you disagree with this lobby, we are going to eliminate you, and we're going to lie about you, we're going to put your face on terrorist pictures, etc. No, that's when people have to rally and go, not on our watch. We're tired of this. We're tired of you eliminating every politician that dares to disagree with you. So I totally support what Anna's saying. And one more thing, remember in the censure vote, 22 Democrats joined the Republicans, and what happened to unity? Even Pramila Jayapal, who does not have a record of strength, let's be honest.
Yes, agreed.
Came out and said that those people had betrayed the party and had really strong language, and thank you for saying that. Credit where credit is due, because they never believed in party unity. It was always a gimmick to get progressive votes, and anytime a progressive's on the line, they immediately attack them. But remember, in the old days, all of the Democrats would have joined the Republicans in censuring Rashida Tlaib. So it's a new day, and the dam is breaking. So there's hope there.
There's also hope in the fact that 4 Republicans voted no on censuring Rashida Tlaib.
Guys, this is beyond Israel and Palestine. The wings are getting realigned.
Yes.
There's a political realignment here, and I don't know where it ends and what the final results will be. But there is now, and this is a good development. There is now Republicans and Democrats voting with each other that you would never expect, right? From the opposite ends of the spectrum, and not because of the old bipartisanship, which is, oh, hey, your corporate donor agrees with my corporate donor. Okay, that used to be bipartisanship in Washington. Now there's a bipartisanship where they're going, I'm just going to vote my conscience. I don't care if the right wing or the left wing agrees. I don't care what, and a lot of times and some of those Republicans, we disagree vehemently with so many of what they stand for. But as long as they're not corrupt and they're being honest and they're actually voting out of principle, fantastic.
I think there's also some likelihood that voters have become far more politicized and far more politically active. There are far more protests happening all across the country for various issues. And so I don't know if it's equalizing things among voters versus corporate money. Because look, the whole point of the corporate money is to fund the campaign so they can run the ads and win their reelection bid. But if you are angering your own constituents, that money is not gonna help you out. And so now I go to the congressional staffers, because this is where it really does warm my heart, because this was a bipartisan effort, a real bipartisan effort. So congressional staffers, 100 of them from both political parties, Republicans and Democrats, staged a walkout yesterday on Wednesday to call for lawmakers that they work for to endorse a ceasefire, okay? So HuffPost reports that gathered on the US Capitol steps, the staffers held a moment of silence and led prayers for the 1,400 Israelis killed by Hamas in its October 7th attack, and the more than 10,000 Palestinians killed by the US-backed Israeli force in its retaliatory bombardment of Gaza. The group of congressional staffers also read this statement prior to their moment of silence. Let's take a look.
We are congressional staffers on Capitol Hill, and we are no longer comfortable being silent.
We were horrified by the brutal October 7th attacks on Israeli civilians, and we are horrified by the overwhelming response by the Israeli government that has killed thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Our constituents are pleading for a ceasefire, and we are the staffers answering their calls every day.
Most of our bosses on Capitol Hill are not listening to the people they represent. We demand our leaders speak up, call for a ceasefire, a release of all hostages, and an immediate de-escalation now. We are gathered here today to mourn the loss of every single beautiful and innocent life. We join now in a moment of silence in interfaith prayer for those who we have lost.
I should also note that they have the American people behind them. There are 80% of Democrats, Democratic voters who want a ceasefire, and 66% of voters overall are calling for a ceasefire. And so I love what they're doing. If you want to support what they're doing and calling for a ceasefire, let's go to graphic 6 real quick. You can go to ceasefiretoday.com. That's ceasefiretoday.com. Cenk, any final words?
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about several different studies that show that politicians, including Democratic politicians, are far more conservative than their voters. than the average voter, not even just the Democratic voter. And every study shows this. It's in the book, Justice is Coming. But the staffers in the past would have never protested their own representatives. Unheard of. The fact that over 100 of them are out there going, no, the people that we work for are wrong, and they are way more conservative than the average American voter, including most Republicans. They're more, a lot of times, the Democratic Congress people are more conservative than the Republican voters. And so this is another interesting realignment situation. There's a rebellion afoot. I think people are sick of this system overall, and they're starting to hear the voice of the American people.
Totally agree. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about Joe Manchin deciding against running for re-election, what is motivating his decision and what comes next. We'll get into all the details and more when we come back.
As you can, I'm out of time. I'll be back. Back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, MSD, Nick, Sonia Deckert, and Scott Adams. You guys are all amazing. We do the show with our viewers, tyt.com/join. Either join, become a member, or donate, either way.
Is it that Scott Adams?
I always wonder that, because Scott, I see your name all the time. You might have become a member, dropped down, become one again, or I don't know if you went to. Anyway, Scott, if you are that Scott Adams, thank you for having an open mind. If you're not, sorry. Okay, and Jason Olea, thank you for gifting 5 Young Turks memberships. We appreciate your generosity. All right, Anna.
Big news impacting the Senate today. Let's get into it.
After months of deliberation and long conversation with my family, I believe in my heart of hearts that I've accomplished what I set out to do for West Virginia. I've made one of the toughest decisions of my life and decided that I will not be running for re-election to the United States Senate.
Good riddance. We won't miss you. But the question is, what does he have planned next? Let's watch.
What I will be doing is traveling the country and speaking out to see if there is an interest in creating a movement to mobilize the middle and bring Americans together. Every incentive in Washington is designed to make our politics extreme. The growing divide between Democrats and Republicans is paralyzing Congress and worsening our nation's problems. The majority of Americans are just plain worn out. Our economy is not working for many Americans, from the rising cost of food and fuel and everything in between. We have a border crisis with illegal drugs entering our country and killing Americans every day. Our national debt is out of control, and Americans don't feel safe, even in their own communities. We are providing critical aid to 2 of our allies, fighting wars for their survival. And we must prevent being pulled into a major war ourselves. These are not Republican or Democratic challenges. These are American challenges.
Now, of course, that was conservative Democratic Senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, who, as you just heard, will not be seeking re-election. The whole spiel he gave in that second video makes me think that he might actually be considering a presidential run. We
Definitely.
can get to, interesting, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I wanted to share a few more details, including how poorly he's been polling in West Virginia.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, so basically, according to The Hill, Manchin was staring down the toughest electoral challenge of his senatorial career as West Virginia Governor Jim Justice has increasingly become the favorite to win next year. So I looked into some of the polling and I came across the most recent poll having to do with that senatorial race or that Senate race. And it was true. The Emerson College survey of 539 voters conducted October 1st through the 4th showed Justice with 41% support and Manchin with 28%. 15% of voters said that they would support someone else in such a scenario, and 16% are undecided. So there was a pretty good chance that he would not have won re-election. So I think that definitely was the main motivating factor. But again, that whole spiel we heard in the second video does make me think he's considering a presidential run under the banner of no labels, which we've covered on the show in the past. We can get into the details of that in a moment. But Cenk, what are your thoughts? You seem to agree.
Yeah, so he's like, I look deep into my polls. I mean, heart, that's where I look. Yeah. Please spare us the load of crap. You weren't gonna win, that's why you're not running. There's had nothing to do with your heart and nothing to do with, I believe I've done enough. I've screwed over enough average Americans. I stopped every bill that would help them, child tax credit, paid family leave, higher wages. I killed it all in favor of my corporate donors. And so I think I've done enough to pleasure them. And keep it real, brother. No one believes you other than reporters. I just looked it up and it bothers me. It's just one headline, but it bothers me so much. In the headline about how he's retiring and thinking of running for president, ABC said, moderate Joe Manchin.
I know.
Why? Why do you give that to him? He says, in that video you saw, the extremes are wrong. What are you talking about? You're in the extreme. So I give this example all the time, but it applies to almost all the policies that he helped to kill. A paid family leave polls at 84%. He's in the 16%. The 16% is extreme. The 84% is moderate. Reporters, I'm begging you, stop doing propaganda on behalf of corporate corrupt politicians like Joe Manchin. What part of 16% is moderate? No, every bill he killed was intensely popular. His positions have been extremist, corporatist, and incredibly unpopular all throughout. So now, is he going to run for president? Well, he's been threatening it the whole time for a number of reasons. And one of the ways that you can tell is the new haircut. Okay, I'm largely kidding here, but if you notice when he was running in Joe Manchin, he parted his hair in the middle and looked more like a West Virginian. Now he's thinking of running in the country, he's got a nice little new haircut.
He used to part his hair in the middle,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I did notice that there was a change with his hair, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But by the way, I don't know if he has enough pro-America stuff going on in that office. But by the way, I love it, I don't have a problem with it. It's just like bald eagle statue here, bald eagle statue there, red wall, American flag. We get it, okay.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I'm amused by that, but no problem. And the haircut, who cares? Okay, so now getting the serious stuff. Yes, he's talked with no labels already. They're considering a third party run. And part of the reason is Manchin's thinking, well, how else am I gonna get rich and famous, right? I can't win in West Virginia anymore. I'm deeply unpopular with the Democrats and the Republicans. So, and these no labels guys are corporate extremists. That's perfect for me. They'll funnel me a lot of money to run for president. That way I'll screw over Biden again. I'll screw over the Democrats again. That's the whole point of my existence, is to destroy the Democratic Party and its agenda, and while I'm pretending to be a Democrat, and hand over everything to the donors. So, you know, if you want Donald Trump to win, to give another giant corporate tax cut, which is what Trump is promising to do, you would send in your dog, Joe Manchin, to go run. So that's why no labels and the corporations that support them are thinking of using this dog over here, Joe Manchin, to go and screw over Democrats again. But hashtag kick him out. Why is he still in the party? He does us no good at all. All he did was betray the Democratic agenda. You remember? They bullied and threatened every progressive that dared to say that they are considering voting against those bills, right? They're like, you better not, we'll destroy your career, you better get in line, right? But with Manchin, when he actually did kill those policies, they're like, we love Joe Manchin, what a wonderful model, Jojo, here, have my pen.
Just like that.
Okay, kinda, I can show you the video. Can you kick him out now? It's actually a freebie, because it's largely symbolic at this point. No, my guess is the next time that Joe Biden says anything about Joe Manchin, it is going to be to kiss his ass. Hear me now, quote me later. Let's see if I'm right or wrong.
Now, a few points I want to bring up in regard to the possibility of Joe Manchin running for president. So as the Hill reports, Manchin has notably declined to tamp down chatter of a potential no labels independent bid, having visited New Hampshire for an event by the group over the summer. And let's go to graphic 6. No Labels is seeking access to the ballot across the country with the idea of putting together a unity ticket that would be led by one Republican and one Democrat. So this would be an independent ticket. And I am curious to see, honestly, I'm curious to see how that plays out. Because RFK Jr., who's now running as an independent, is pulling in a pretty sizable portion of the electorate, with these polls that are coming out, right? We're seeing him get 22% support. I just wanna enjoy the embarrassment that I think Joe Manchin is going to experience if he does in fact plan to run as an independent. We'll see.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of independents. By the way, Jill Stein entered the race today.
Oh, of course she did.
So now that's a third independent running. But interesting things are afoot in that general election, right? And so I don't know how it plays out. But if Manchin enters, I think Anna's right. He's gonna get around Cornel West numbers. And they think like, oh, Americans love corporate politicians. We took a corporate politician from the Republicans and a corporate politician from the Democrats. America will love this ticket. Maybe the press will love that ticket, but America's gonna hate that ticket. And I would love to see Cornel West and Jill Stein beat that ticket until they're so humiliated that they leave the race.
All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back for the second hour of the show, we've got a lot more to get to, including Ramaswamy getting called scum on the debate stage. And then there are demands for him to answer for himself and how he allegedly attacked Nikki Haley's family. We'll get into that and more coming up in the second hour of the show. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.